On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a consultant in life sciences. I actually focus in on helping companies scale with clarity around their strategy, people, process, and technology. One of the things I'm currently offering is every week at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, we have a quick session. It's 30 minutes that focuses in on helping organizations scale and focus on, key issues that organizations might be having. You can find that series at the link that's at the very bottom of this page, thescalingmethod.com/thoughts will take you there and actually, allow you to sign up. And with signing up, essentially what you get is a weekly reminder from me, in addition to the materials that we cover. This week, we're actually talking about problem solving. So for organizations that have seen the same problem come back over and over again, this session actually is for you. This gives you some tools and techniques in terms of troubleshooting things in a way that essentially they will not be back. You will solve the underlying problems that sort of come along with growing an organization and finding a way to create bigger problems that constantly pop up again. And this will sort of alleviate that. So I welcome you to join me in those sessions, and hopefully it is helpful to your organization for the future. So in this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is KO. Kalyan is a disruptor and technology innovator with over 20 years of experience in leadership positions in clinical operations and outsourcing at major pharma and biotechs. Kalyan is the founder and president of Clin.AI, a disruptive startup that is revolutionizing the way a vendor selection and management is conducted in the industry. So with that, welcome, Kalyan.
Thank you, Don. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So would you mind taking just a little bit of time and telling the listeners just a little bit about yourself? And it seems like you've got such a vast history in this area. So I'm very interested to explore this.
No, very happy to. But maybe I should start off just by telling people that if you think my first name and last name right now are a bit of tongue twisters, when I was born, I had 42 characters in my name.
Oh,
So
wow.
this is the shortened version of it. So all credit to my mom. She put in a lot of time. So I like to mention that at least. And now Kalyan Obalampalli is my name. Kalyan is like, you can pronounce it like carry on, but with an L. Where if as we've talked before, I just go by KO like a knockout. And maybe I'll just start with this too. When I initially, one of my neighbors in the first job that I had, she was the one who came up to me and she said, you should go by KO. A little skeptical. So, I started calling myself KO. Then I go to this Starbucks and the guy asked me, what's your name? After some thought, I said KO. And he's like a knockout? I said, yeah. And he's like, this is on the house. So it was an interesting start to the name. So, so I'm more than happy to go by KO,
And what are all 42 characters, if you don't mind? Can you pronounce everything?
Yeah. So it goes like this: Obalampalli Srinivasa Kalyana Chakravarti. That's what the name was. Obalampalli is the name that I came from. Srinivasa was the name that I guess my mom liked. Kalyan is actually the name that I should go by. And then I guess she added on something else. And there's so many names here. Let me throw in one more.
Right.
Yeah. So a little bit about me. So my undergrad is in electrical engineering, and then I did my master's in biomedical engineering in Tennessee, and then I started off my career, and I was in preclinical animal work, and so I guess the logical next step was clinical operations. So I flew to Los Angeles, started my career with a company called St. Jude Medical, and I was with Devices for a bit. Worked with St. Jude, another big company, Abbott. Then I moved to pharmaceuticals. Worked for this company called Pharmaceutical, which was one of the best experience that I've had. Learned a lot about operations. So the difference is when you work in devices, you just do everything. When you come to operations, it's very siloed. You got to do this, and that's your specialization. So as I've worked in pharma in clinical operations, I for AbbVie, and I just noticed that this is such a different world, and there's so many things that are being done in relatively inefficient ways. With all due respect, and I just thought that there's so many gaps, and there's an opportunity to fill one of these gaps, and that's what led me to my current pursuit, which is which I founded in 2021. Clin.AI. So yeah, here we are talking about 3 years from the day I started. Here we are talking about the company and talking more
Y-
about it.
Yeah, and so I mean, was it primarily the inefficiencies that led you to starting Clin.AI?
I don't think if I can necessarily say that, because I've always wanted to do something on my own. As you know, this might come as a surprise to many, but in 2016, I didn't have kids at that time, and I didn't know what else to do with my time. So, on the side, I started a business that does healthy vending machines. Completely something that you wouldn't expect anybody to do. Uh, my idea was, the vending machines generally have all these junk products in there. So I thought, can we do a little more healthier way of providing snacks to kids? So I think that it was a pivotal moment in my life, because here I was knowing nothing about this business, walking into this college and talking to somebody that I had never met before, and turns out this guy gave me a chance. He said, "Okay," and I was very surprised when I heard the "okay, I want to give you a chance." And then the next opportunity that I had was at a college where there was Pepsi. It's very hard to kick Pepsi out, and somehow I was able to convince them and tell them, provide the value and say, "This is what Pepsi does. This is what we can do for you." And they actually kicked Pepsi out. I remember making the call to Pepsi and letting them know to come take all their machines out of the. So, not to go too deep into that, but that I think gave me the confidence that I've always wanted to do something first, and secondly, it gave me the confidence that if you want to do something, there's nothing that you can do. It's just about giving it a try. So I've always wanted to do something, and then I have selected and managed vendors for my entire career in clinical operations, and I always felt that we're giving away these 30, 40, $50 million contracts, and I'm not even exaggerating. When we do these contracts, you're doing this via Excel file. And specifically, when I there was an year where I selected vendors for more than $100 million, which quickly became 130 because of change orders and things that we can get into. And I just thought, this is the amount of due diligence that I did. I felt was lesser than what I would do even if I hire someone to remodel my kitchen. This was just me. I'm not generalizing, how everybody does it. That's how I felt. And I looked around to see, hey, is there anybody else who can who helps with this? And I wasn't satisfied with what was around. So the way it started was I actually learned how to code. So I'd never coded before. Probably the only coding lesson that I took was when I was 17. It was not a part of my curriculum, but I think somehow it stayed with me, like the fundamentals. And when I started learning how to code, it seemed relatively okay. I never ever thought that I would actually code a platform out, but that's what life is, right? You start off with something and you build on it, and here I was, where I was programming, and suddenly I created a platform, and then we quickly found some beta users who became paying users, etc. I have an interesting story there if I can share.
Yes, yeah, please.
So when I started coding, and I was about a few months into it, learning how to code, there's a good friend of mine. His name is Dave. He's a CEO at a relatively big company, and maybe. Uh, they've had funding of $30 million or so in the last few years. So it's a decent sized company. So he and I, we were talking just after Thanksgiving, November 27th, I believe, and he insults me by saying, free only takes you so far. So I mean, I don't know how I don't know why you're being so cheap about it. You have this idea, get it programmed, go sell it. Don't waste your time. And I personally, as an engineer, maybe my ego was really hurt, and I told him on that call, by Jan 2nd, if I don't have the MVP, the minimum viable product ready, I'm gonna quit.
Mm.
So I remember I closed my doors. I had two kids at that time, like 2 and 3 almost, and I told my wife, I'm sorry, but I have to do this. So for about 18, 19 days, I never opened the door. And um, the only thing I did was it was my daughter's birthday in the middle, so I did come out for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But on Jan 2nd, on Jan 1st, I texted him and I said, the MVP is done. And the funniest thing is, I never used it because 4 days later, I had another conversation with somebody who said, "Oh, that's not what we need. If you can build this in a month, then we'll use it." So that was my next thing. I built that for the next. So it's a funny thing. You've been in small business, you know how it is. You never know what the next step is going to be. You just trust your gut and um, build the next thing that's needed. But that's what got us so many customers since then.
And I mean, the one challenge that I've seen in the past is that I think they describe it as the innovator's dilemma, right? Is that sometimes, the comments that you hear, whatever, might not necessarily lead you in the direction that you need to go, right?
Yeah.
Overall, as a company, how did you sort of filter through, what somebody was saying whenever they're saying no, you should build this other thing versus using your MVP? What sort of signaled that, hey, this is the definite right direction?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the most important part of the journey. Is when I started, I thought there was a problem. I wrote this, like everybody else does, I guess. I wrote this 25 page business plan. I was convinced this is what it was, and there were people happy to listen to me, and they agreed this was a problem. But you're right. People will say what comes to their mind at their moment, and they may not really mean it, and they may never pay for it if you have a
Mm-hmm.
solution to that problem. Uh, so that's where I think a good friend of mine, Vijay Damujivarapu, who he was an acquaintance. We knew each other, and we had talked at another company that my brother-in-law had, where I had a small part. He was the one I think who gave me, who kind of said, hey, don't believe everything people tell you. And the first question he asked me was, have you done any interviews? And he said, even those interviews may not have any value, but have you put the questions together? Like, what are you going to ask them? And have you heard about what they've said? And can you have you not talked in that interview and actually let the other person speak? Because a lot of times I think we impose our ideas on the people that we're interviewing, especially. So I think that was the first, wake up call that everything that you hear from people is not real. So he was the one who helped me structure an hypothesis, and asking the five series of five questions without talking
Mm-hmm.
and letting the other person talk. And once we get to the end of it, asking questions like, would you pay for something like this? And then delve even deeper into it and try to get to that point where they really have to make a decision, yes or no, about the payment. So I think that was the first step. And I never talked to any of my friends. I actually messaged people on LinkedIn. May of, I think, 2020 was when I just texted somebody to just talk about this. Obviously, the idea was brewing in my mind for many years. The first interview that I did, she actually turned out to become my first customer. I had no idea who she was before I picked up that phone and made that call. So I think it was super critical to go through that interview process. I spoke to probably close to 50 industry professionals trying to hone in on the problem. And then, as you saw, whatever problem, the main problem that I thought was the problem turned out to be something that people may not pay for. And that's why, when I built that MVP a few days later, I had this conversation with this same first person that I'd interviewed, and she had said, hey, if you build this, I'd use it. Then we built it and we launched it, and that actually became our flagship. So yeah, I think it's a matter of listening to people. But when somebody comes to the point and says, I'll actually use it if you build it, I think that's a really good takeoff point where you can trust your guts, and based on all the interviews that you have done or the market research that you would have done, I think it'll tell you quickly whether this is the direction to go to or not. But spending a lot of time in validating your own problem, the problem that you're assuming, and in making sure that you've done all the interviews, I think is a critical part of things.
Yeah,
I'm glad
that's.
we
I mean,
touched upon that.
I think that's the most substantial advice any entrepreneur honestly could ever get. Right? Is spending time with people, just asking, at a very fundamental level, one is this a problem that you see, and then two, is there a solution that you would pay for, around that, if that's the basis of your company. And I can't necessarily say that this applies to every business that's out there, because sometimes the problems are a little better known on the drug
Yeah.
side than the medical device side. But I would say in terms of most technology companies, this is probably a perfect segue to saying that, look, this is how you sort of really fundamentally start to understand your customer base, is you got to talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Y Combinator, who we were interviewed by, has this thing that says, build something that people will actually use that solves a problem. Um, and
Right.
as simple as that is, I think asking that question to yourself every step of the process, I think it's something that's of great value.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think their methodology, right, starts with, are you a problem in search of an answer, or are you an answer to a problem? And the first one, being the one that they don't fund. If you're a problem in search of an answer, is not something that they actually reach out and fund either for anybody.
No, precisely. Precisely.
I feel that fundamental sneeze coming on, that everybody sort of says, "Hang on a second." So I was having a pause for that. But can you sort of talk a little bit about the key features of Clin.AI, and what it is that you offer with the platform?
Absolutely. So the problem, as I discussed, was, essentially selecting vendors, especially when they're 40, $50 million or something, doing it using Excel files is fine. But I think, it would make sense to use a platform where you can, the reason this is a problem, I'll get into what we do, but I want to define the problem just a little bit. When you select these vendors, the budgets that come from these vendors, the proposals, they're like, let's say, imagine an Excel file with 300 lines and about 20 columns sometimes. And some of them may have 300 lines, some of them have 100 lines. So the point is, everybody does it very differently. So to select a vendor, especially when you're and there's no way to compare them one to one. And this is just, scratching the surface of the problem. There's many other things, like if you have questions, there's not a streamlined way to get all the questions answered. If you do get them answered, there's no structured way of documenting all these questions and the responses to the questions from each of the vendors. So it's a maybe I'll define it this way. One is, comparing them one to one is very difficult. And then second thing is, even if you select somebody, keeping them accountable is very difficult, which is when the change orders come in. And anybody from clinical operations listening, they probably dread clinical operation, when they probably dread the change orders. So what Clin.AI does is, essentially, we've built a cloud-based platform that streamlines both vendor selection and management. And the way that it does it is, if you want to select vendors, we help you create the right RFPs, which is request for proposals. Because if you don't put a right request in the first place, you may not get a great response from the vendors. So we help you create these the RFPs for any kind of vendor, like there's CROs, there's central labs, etc. And then we send it to the vendors on the cloud. The vendors respond on the cloud, and typically then you would hire someone to compare the numbers, etc., for a couple of weeks. In our case, there's no 2 weeks. As soon as the vendors respond, we provide you with analytics that help you understand, quickly do a comparison, analytics that help you um, negotiate with the vendor, and analytics that will help you select the best vendor, both in terms of price and quality. So that's our flagship product. But now we also have vendor management, which is, you can manage these change orders. So imagine you start building a house, and the initial quote is 1 million, and then the contractor comes back and says, we need $200,000 more. And I'm making a very simplistic case out of it. So the next platform allows you to keep track of what you would have spent, what are you spending, keep track of all your invoices, and if there are any changes, helps you analyze and go into it using analytics, instead of you opening up a huge Excel file and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I would imagine that it simplifies the workflow quite a bit. Providing some better oversight in terms of what it is that you're going to do in the trial.
Absolutely. I think a couple things that stood out was, one is, the feedback that we constantly receive is, it saves hours of frustration. and then it keeps them compliant. So the vendor selection process, especially, right, they're compliant. So if an inspector shows up, they can say, "This is how we selected our vendor." But I don't mean to toot my own horn or anything like that. But I'm from clinical operations. I quit my job to do this. So at the end of the day, I'd like to think that I'm adding some value at least. So it's been very important for me since our first customer to make sure that I'm adding value. We've gotten really good feedback. There's an article in Clinical Leader about us as to what we do. But I think what I enjoyed the most is during it. Let's say if I have a demo, I don't think I've had one demo. I had one actually, where the guy said, "I can do this using Excel files," and I was like, "Of course you can."
Of
Uh,
course you can.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "But is that what you want to spend your career? Is that what you want to spend your time on?" But I've had that, except that one. Every other one that I've had, I've gotten. There's a stage that we get to in the demo where like, "Wow, we can do this now," and I think that's one of the most satisfying moments for me because and after the using the platform too, they're like, this really saved us time. And one client actually told us they were able to make a decision like a couple hours after the analytics became available. So that's a little too fast. I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, I think that's what's been the most satisfying moment in terms of like what the value we've been able to add and what it does for our customers.
And it's so important to have somebody, I feel like, that's walked the walk, right? Somebody that's been in clinical operations, that's had to sort of do these things, and also is actively listening to the industry. Because there's one particular software tool that I just recently reviewed for somebody, and my feedback was, look, you have a lot of great things, but here's my sort of feedback is, this process has a process. It goes step 1, step 2, step 3, and now all of a sudden I have 4 independent tools almost that look like they're truly independent. Why
Yeah.
not make them flow from one to the next to the next? And it sounds like your tool very much does that for people.
I mean, John, that's exactly the frustration. I've implemented some softwares at some of these bigger companies. They were not made for biotech or pharma. They were made for something else, and now this is just they're ramming this down our throats. Where this was a simple timelines software, and I know that 2 directors were in charge of it, and it took 6 months for the teams to enter all the information. It shouldn't be that way. And I think you bring up a really important point again. When I started the company, right, my brother-in-law has a company that does outsourcing of the software, and he was like, there's UX, there's UI, and there's front end, back end. You don't know any of this stuff. Why are you trying to program this? And I didn't want. I just felt that I should learn and I should do it myself. But the interesting part is, turns out this UX and UI, right? You can just look at the best practices and just copy them. And the second thing is, a lot of the times the feedback that I have is it's very simple. The platform that we've built, and it was not, I didn't start off with that mission, but there's not all these bells and whistles. There's not too many things. It's very simple. Just get to the point. So there is actually an advantage, I think, to somebody in the industry trying to code something, because to your point, we know what we need. We don't need anything more than that. Otherwise, you get like so many options where you click on these 3 dots, now you have a huge list. You click on something, then you have a huge list. Yeah, I think there's unknowingly, by chance, I think I stumbled upon this path, which actually I believe may have become a strength for the company. So you never know what your strengths are. Your weakest link, which was my programming, turned into something that was of strength.
Yeah, that's perfect. So first of all, maybe you could define this for me. So what is ICH E6R2?
So these are standards set by ICH, as to how clinical research should be done, how studies should be run, and they keep changing. These are guidelines.
Mm.
So it's not like it's not like a law, but these are guidelines that you're supposed to follow when you conduct clinical trials. So you want to stay compliant with them. For example, related to vendor selection and management, right? You want to document how you selected the vendor, because at the end of the day, sponsored companies are the ones who's responsible. Even if you outsource something, the vendor is still responsible for what they're doing, but you're accountable for everything as a sponsor. So how you select the vendors that you're outsourcing to, you have to be able to show that, hey, this is the process that we followed, and this is how we selected the vendor that was the best possible um, match for the current project that we're working on, and not that, hey, I gave it to my brother or my brother-in-law in my case. So you got to document that, and you got to show that you have oversight of that vendor.
Mm.
So that is something that, it's a good question, because of this is not something that we started off thinking about, but this was the feedback that we got from our customers, is because we provide them with this package that shows exactly how their vendor was selected. It has all the information, the back and forth and all that stuff, and they just put it in their documentation, something called trial management file, which is like which is a repository of exactly how the study, it tells the story of the trial essentially. So they can put it in there and they can just forget about it, instead of proposals and questions, the back and forth, the budgets being in people's emails or drives, the shared drives and all that stuff. Now it's in a package that goes into your official TMF, where if an inspector shows up and says, can you tell me how you did this, how you selected the vendor for ABC study? They can just say, okay, here you go. Here's how we did it. So
Yeah.
it's one of the first steps that you take when you start a study. And, I think if you answer the first questions right, I think the future questions from the inspectors might be a little easier.
No, that's perfect. And so, what I'm hearing is that, Clin.AI actually, helps with that, that proof and the traceability, overall to show and demonstrate, how you've met the industry standards.
Absolutely. I think in short, what Clin.AI does is, first, it helps you select the best vendors, both in terms of price and quality. Secondly, it's in the process, it'll at least save you 8 weeks, because you can select your vendors faster, because you're comparing vendors one to one and you're negotiating, you can save up to 5 to 10% of the contract price, and these are all huge numbers. And then it keeps you compliant. And don't take my word for it. Anybody who's listening, there's an article written about us by one of our clients. um, Feel free to check it out. In fact, when this person wrote this article, Don, I woke up and I opened LinkedIn, and here I see an article published by this person. I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me? I could
Right.
have made a big marketing campaign out of it. um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's always interesting though. But I mean, it's great to have people, to use Seth Godin's words, in your tribe, sort of pushing your products as well, because honestly, it's a genuine feedback that's probably more valuable than anything any of us could ever create about our companies.
Yeah, I agree, and I think a couple things that come to my mind is, one is, I'm super grateful to all these people who've been open to new technologies, because without them, I don't think I would have done any of the things that I'm doing right now. And the second thing I think that was significant to me in this whole journey is knowing that those who didn't make it were not fools.
Mm.
So there's a lot that goes into startups. There's a lot of ups and downs, and you may have everything, but the timing might be wrong. Biotech's gone through some rough times in the past 1 year. So I think those are my two biggest learnings. I know that was not the question, but uh, two things that stand out for me is, one, without people that are ready to give you a try, are forward looking, my company wouldn't exist. And the second one is, just knowing that those who didn't make it, I'm here on their shoulders, and also that they were not fools for not making it. I
Yeah,
mean, I haven't made it in any way completely, but I'm just saying.
yeah, no, it's. I mean, I think it's valuable as well in terms of, sort of, there's a lot of people I feel like that say, hey, look, even though this company couldn't do it, I feel like we can. And sometimes they sort of trip over the same exact problems, eventually. And maybe that's another opportunity for, another interview, another discussion with people that have already been there and found those failures, right? What did they find, and what are all of the intricacies that we don't know from the outside looking in, right? That maybe they could share. Can you talk about the role of AI and deep learning in Clin.AI and how it helps with the vendor selection process?
Yeah. So as we've pivoted a couple of times, so the where the AI part comes in is, we're working on a couple of deep learning algorithms, and we're actually, they both are in beta that we provide to our customers. So the vendor selection and management is pretty straightforward, and then we have these couple of deep learning algorithms. I think like any other AI company, right, you need a lot of data, and since we've been in the process, we've realized we you know how much data we need. So we have a couple of algorithms that are in the pipeline. I can't go into too much detail of that because we haven't released all the details yet. But essentially, um, in the future, if there's a specific vendor requirement, our algorithm is going to go into into helping select that specific vendor. And as of now, the aspect of deep learning, etc., that's already incorporated into the systems is essentially we've done a lot of research as to what people look for when they're selecting vendors and managing vendors. And I think some of this has gone into our UI, which is we know what matters to people, and based on the research that we've done, so what we have on the platform is essentially exactly what people need to look at. uh, you know the things that matter the most. If they want to delve deeper into it, we have all these extra analytics that people can delve deeper into. But that's kind of where we are right now. Our flagship product is vendor selection. Vendor management is our second product, and moving forward, we're going to be releasing a couple algorithms, but that might take a little bit of time because we want to make sure that we have enough data to be able to solve the problem that we're trying to solve for the industry.
Perfect. So I like to ask these last few questions more
Yeah.
centered around sort of your background and key learnings and things like that. And so KO, what's the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
The greatest leadership lesson. Um, I think what's applicable in my case is, um, I think the one that comes to my mind is essentially, don't be whatever that you expect anybody else to do. I think you got to be able to prepare. You got to be prepared to do it yourself. Um, I think leading is one thing, but yeah, essentially, hearing what's needed for your company and making it clear to all the your team, right? I think essentially your team has to be on the same page, and I think team takes a lot of energy from the person who started the company, etc. I don't know use the word leader or anything like that for myself, but I think I started the company and I have a team that's working with me, and they feed off the energy that I give off. So my mantra, or what I've been told or what I've learned in my life, is essentially there's um, whatever is in front of you. I think you just got to do it with all your heart, not think about the result. And as long as you're doing that, and as long as I'm not asking anybody to do something that I wouldn't do myself, so I'm not going to ask my BD person to go do something, and before you know I'm doing the same thing in front of him, whether I'm a BD expert or not, and
Mm.
making sure that we're all talking to our customers. Doesn't matter what role you're in. Pick up the phone and try to solve a problem for the customer. You may not know it, but you fix it. But in the process, you learn about it. So I think the leadership lesson for me is, whatever you do it with your heart and don't expect any result from it. And secondly, don't ask anybody to do something that you're not prepared to do it myself. So those are the couple of things that come to my mind right now, John.
So important. What inspires you?
I don't think it takes too much for me to get inspired. I've a list of maybe 100 plus things in an Excel file sitting in Google somewhere, which are all problems that I've thought about quite a bit and tried to resolve. Everything from, you know, there were times where I bought all these things from Home Depot and I was um, trying to create this automated Indian breakfast maker or something along those lines. I
Mm.
had this spray painters and all kinds of stuff from Home Depot. I'm spraying things all around the kitchen, and my wife and my mom were like, they just completely hated it. So I think there's any problem that I look at inspire, which is a dangerous thing, but it takes little to inspire me. But on a more serious note, I'm at a stage in my life where I want to add value. I think
Hmm.
that's what most important, and that inspires to me. If I'm able to add value, if I have a client, the most important thing for me is if they're able to, after the experience, if they're able to say, "Hey, that actually added value into what I was doing." I think that's what inspires me the most right now.
Very good. What concerns you?
Um, Not too much these days, to be honest, because I think there's so many things that are outside of your control. I think I only control 5% of what happens. So I I try not to get too concerned about, did you mean about the company? Or
You could take this personally, or
yeah.
you can certainly take it, based on the company as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think not too much worries me these days, because I think a lot of things have to fall in place in general for things to happen. We've done really well in the past couple of years. We've facilitated close to $250 million of contracts. So I could say we've done really well. So at the same time, I know anything can happen at any time, especially given a small business. So not too much. I don't know if it's a haughty answer, but not too much concerns me. Not from the perspective that even though I've got everything right. I think more from the perspective of I understand. I think I know what I want to do with my life moving forward, and I understand that a lot of things are not under my control. So you control the controllables and not worry about the unknowns. So not too much that concerns me in general.
Yeah, great way and approach in terms of considering life. I know there's a very strong philosophy amongst a lot of people that have made a fair amount of money, that essentially is the first thing that you need to give up in life is watching the news. So, because you again don't control what goes on in the news, but I also think it gives you an outsider's view in terms of what's going on in the world. But there's a couple different perspectives in this. If I were to think about what you should be concerned about versus what you shouldn't be, things that you can't control, certainly are things that you should drop pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think just be yourself. For example, I don't read books at all. I don't think I've finished one book in my life except for the Trojan War, which I read when I was a kid. I read the book multiple times because I loved it. But since then, I pick books where it's not like I know I'll get to the end as soon as I start. So I pick books where I don't have to. Where I don't have it's unconnected. So I have this book here. It's something about metaphors, and I can just pick up a page and I can just read one page, and that's it. I can put it back. It doesn't. I don't have to remember that or anything. So I say that because I think there's a lot of help there, and there's a lot of books. There's a lot of information about how to lead and this and that, and how to be a leader. I mean, this is just my perspective that I'm sharing. I mean, I'm always ready to accept any advice that people give me and to take it. But I think there's just a lot of information, and I think people believe in it a little too much. So maybe
Mm.
just be yourself and use your own intuition to figure out your own path, because I mean, you're living your life, and I think not to say something very very um, not trying to sound pedantic or something, but I'm just saying that's just a piece of advice or something that I'm sharing with others is, uh, yeah, you have
I,
your own path and you'll figure it out.
I actually like the I actually like the contrarian view in terms of, hey, look, first of all, books don't necessarily have to be read cover to cover. One of the jokes that I actually have oftentimes said to people is, the bookshelf that's behind me is filled with books actually that have had the spines cracked, right? So one of my favorite things to ask, people in terms of, whenever they have big bookshelves is actually, have you actually opened each one? So, because the reality is most people will buy a lot of books and then they just go on the shelf. They never get opened. And I had one person that worked for me where we were talking about key points that he could learn from a particular book. And he was saying, look, I've, gotten in here and actually, read quite a bit of what's in there. I don't know where he'd gotten, some of the points that he had extracted, probably the internet. But essentially, I
Yeah.
said, "Can you hand me the book?" And he said, "Sure." And whenever you open it, the glue in the back cracks, and so I'm like, I could tell whether or not if you've read the book page to page, or using your method, I probably wouldn't be able to do the same trick. But essentially, most books you can hear whether or not if somebody's opened it and really extracted information out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of books that are written, and very few are worth reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
just in my humble opinion, and I think it's great to read books, but yeah, just my way of managing things. But I am guilty of buying books like what you said. Maybe I tried, but I never finished them, or
Hmm.
there's only a one or two, one or two chapters that I wanted to read,
Yeah.
and that's all I want to read.
Well, it's great way to sort of, take that approach as well. I mean, because then, given the limited time that all of us have, diving in quick is a great way to at least extract the information that you need and then put it down. Don't feel guilty about it. It's not necessarily
Yeah,
something you have to do, going cover to cover. So last
yeah.
question, what excites you?
Right now, what definitely excites me is, there's a lot of, from the company perspective, I think there's a lot of, and the industry perspective, there's a lot of focus now on using technology. There's a lot more people that are open to it. And I think maybe that's just good timing for me. But I've definitely seen that the industry is moving in the direction of adopting technologies, adopting these that are new. We do a lot of there are a lot of inefficiencies, not inefficiencies, but the current way of doing things is probably not the most efficient. Let
Mm,
me put it that way. Like, we review a lot of reports manually still in clinical operations, and in drug development too, there are some issues, there's some challenges. And I think AI, for all that we know, is probably going to make a lot of those things a lot more easier to manage. It's not the complete solution as of now, because data in is, what kind of data that you input is what's going to decide how that product's going to work. So I think that's the exciting part. I think the exciting part is there are issues, there are challenges. If there are no challenges, then clinical operations, I think, wouldn't have a job. So it's good that we have challenges. I think we're I think that's the exciting part in the industry. And personally, I think I'm at a point of time in my life where I have two girls, five, and no, one of them is going to turn 7. So I think that's the part that I'm looking forward to. I had great fun with them, and I've learned a lot from my kids. The way they get up in the morning, and the way they approach life, the way they get up even if they fall down. How they react and all that stuff. So I'm definitely looking forward to that in my personal life, and in my professional life right now. I think the company is going in the right direction. We have a lot of interest from a couple partners that want to partner with us. So I'm looking forward to, at the end of the day, making an impact to the clients that we work with.
perfect. Well, KO, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. And thanks a lot for sharing with us about where you're at with Clin.AI. And I wish you all the success.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts unfiltered. I really appreciate it. And through the process, I think I learned something about myself here.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.